Good morning, everyone. Sorry, I'm a couple minutes late. Still dealing with this whole switch in time. I am not a morning person, okay? I don't know if any of you are. If you are, I'm very jealous. Just never have been. All right, let me pull this up. Oh, here we go. Let's see. Is anybody out there? Are you all asleep? Okay, some people are awake. That's good. All right, so a couple things. You guys have your lab exam tomorrow, right? So that's happening. And I did finally put up last class or after last class and the announcement that the next assignment, which covers lectures 12 and 13, turn this off, will be due on Tuesday. All right, but hopefully you guys are ready for that lab exam. It should be a lot easier than the lecture exam. So hopefully that goes well for you guys. All right, let me share this big. Hopefully you guys can see the lecture slides. And hopefully you can hear me okay. All right, let's get into it. So last time we finished psychads, right? Psychads takes a little long. That's a bit of a long lecture. We had to do it over two meetings, and part of that is because it's the first seed plant that we ever talk about, so we have to get oriented with new vocabulary, and it's just a whole new thing with the ovule and the pollen grain. So kind of there's a lot of stuff there that we have to cover. So as we go forward now in the seed plants, we're going to have these same players over and over, right? We're going to still have the ovule, we're going to still have the pollen grain. So the material in that way shouldn't be as dense, because now we're just building on what we've already started to build. All right, oh yes, so today we're going to talk about another seed plant, which is the living fossil tree, or Ginkgo biloba. Yep, so you got your assignment coming up on Tuesday. Or that might be a typo. Well, the assignment on Tuesday covers psychads and the lecture before psychads, which is Introduction to the Ovule. I think those this semester are 12 and 13. But just so you know, it's the intro to the seed plants, which goes over the ovule, and the psychads. Yes, you know where we are. So let's get oriented in this plant kingdom, right? So we have already left the non-vascular plants far, far away, way in the past now. And we have even left many of all the other spore-bearing plants far, far away, right? We've dealt with those. Now we're up into the seed plants, and we've already started talking about one type of seed plant, which is the gymnosperms. And the gymnosperms includes cycads, ginkgo, and conifers. Talked about cycads last time and the class before break. Talk about ginkgo today. Okay, here's ginkgo. You've probably seen ginkgo. Believe it or not, it's a very, very common street tree in the New York, New Jersey metropolitan area, and actually in a lot of cities, because it does very, very well in cities. So it grows into these really, really big trees. Its common name is a maidenhair tree, which I think it says on the next slide. And they have these very nice fan-shaped leaves, which are megaphylls, right? Multi-veined leaves. And ginkgo sheds seeds. Right, so the common name for the ginkgo tree is the maidenhair tree. And the reason why it's called that is because the leaves actually look like the pinnules of the maidenhair fern. So if you remember back in the fern lab, we were talking about the different types of ferns that we covered. If you remember, one of them had, well, a couple of them had a false indusium, and one of those was the maidenhair fern. And so when somebody saw the ginkgo tree, they thought, oh, the leaves on this tree look a lot like that fern's pinnules, so we'll call it maidenhair tree. And ginkgo is an easier plant to remember because the phylum name comes from the genus Ginkgo, and there's only in the phylum Ginkgophida, which I think it says on the top here. In the phylum Ginkgophida, right, there's only one genus, Ginkgo, and there's only one species, Ginkgo biloba. Vivian's asking, hey, professor, doesn't this tree stink in the summer? LOL. Yes, this tree stinks. It smells horrible. We'll talk about that a little bit in the upcoming slides. But yes, so I think, let's see, Dr. Casper used to say that it smells kind of like rancid butter, which I always thought to myself, okay, first of all, how do you know what rancid butter smells like? Like your butter should never like get rancid enough to smell. So I always thought that was kind of weird, but that's what he always said. Catherine said, I brought the seeds to eat into my bathroom to wash the skin off, and it stunk for days. Oh no. All right. And Vivian says, I always think it smells like garbage. Yeah, so it smells, so it's not the tree itself that smells, it's the seeds that smell. But when they make seeds, they make a lot of them. And we'll talk about that in the next few slides. But yeah, it is that one. But so we're in the phylum Ginkgophida, that's how you say that. One species and one genus, right? So one genus, Ginkgo, one species, Ginkgo biloba. Nice, easy. You can memorize the phylum, genus, and species very, very easily in Ginkgo. Super popular in temple gardens, so in both China and Japan. And even though this is one of the most common street trees worldwide, we're not really sure if there's any existing wild populations left. So there are tons. It's not in any way in risk of extinction, as it is grown all over the world in cities. But we're really not sure if there's any existing wild populations left, right? All of the trees that are around have been cultivated and planted, to our knowledge. Okay, so remember I said maidenhair tree, right? Well, this is a reminder of what the maidenhair fern looked like, right? So here's a close-up of maidenhair fern leaf, and each of these things here. This is maidenhair fern leaf, and each of these things here, here's one, here's another one, are the pinnules of that leaf, or the leaflets. And those are what somebody thought that the maidenhair or the ginkgo tree's leaves looked like, right? And here you go. Whoa, all right, I can see that. Here's the leaves of the ginkgo biloba, and okay, all right, I'll buy it. Look similar. That's why it's called maidenhair tree. So ginkgo, we call ginkgo living fossil tree. And part of this is because it very well may be the oldest living seed plant, older even than cycads, believe it or not. And we have found fossils that date back to about 350 million years ago. And it still lives today. And not only does it still live today, but it apparently hasn't really changed much in those 300 plus million years. So on the left here, right here, this is a fossilized leaf from, several hundred million years ago. And next to that is an actual real life ginkgo leaf from today. This one's yellow because it's been pulled off the tree and is starting to, lose its pigment, but regardless, very, very similar in appearance and structure to the one that's been fossilized for hundreds of million years. So that's why we call it a living fossil tree, because it's almost like the living tree looks almost identical to the fossilized ones. So kind of cool, actually super cool. All right, right, so very, very economically important as a street tree. You will be hard pressed to walk around New York City or Jersey City, any bigger cities in our area and not walk by a ginkgo biloba. Like you definitely will. Here you go. This is a whole stand of ginkgo biloba as a street tree. And as was mentioned, oh, okay, cool. So they planted one in front of Bradley Hall before COVID. Cool. Yeah, I mean they are very, very common in cities, and as was mentioned, they do stink. Now here's an interesting thing. So I think we go into this a little bit more in later slides, but ginkgo biloba is dioecious. So there are male and female plants, and obviously the plants that make seeds are going to be the female plants. And so back in a long time ago, people were starting to plant ginkgo in cities, and they should have hired a botanist for help before they did that, because there are sections of Brooklyn and sections of the Bronx, and probably sections everywhere, but those are the ones I know of, where whole blocks, like block after block after block, has been planted with ginkgo and planted with female trees. And so at the time of year when it makes the seeds, there are certain blocks, like literally 5 blocks in a row, where the only tree there is ginkgo, and they all release these stinky seeds. Not good planning. This is why they should have consulted botanists, but when making these decisions, but whatever. And so nowadays, when people plant ginkgo on street trees and things like that, they usually plant male trees, because the male trees don't make the stinky seeds. Yeah. Catherine's like, it's gushy and stinky when all the seeds drop at NJIT. Yeah, I mean, they smell. They legit smell. Okay. So we're in ginkgo, right? Ginkgo biloba. So let's talk a little bit about sporophyte generation. Well, we already know we're in the vascular plants. So we already know that the sporophyte generation is dominant and long-lived. Oh, Benjamin writes, I read the city's planting male trees is contributing to a rise in allergies. Sure. I mean, male trees release pollen, right? But I will say I need to look into this more, because so remember, ginkgo is a gymnosperm, and therefore the pollen is a little different than the pollen that's released by your main allergy producing plants, which are angiosperms. So like most of the plants that cause allergies are angiosperms. So I need to look into that. Ben, if you have a link to that, feel free to email me so I can read it, because I think that there's enzymatically speaking, like speaking about enzymes, gymnosperm pollen is not the same as angiosperm pollen. Angiosperm pollen definitely causes allergies, but I think things like conifers, cycads, and ginkgo contribute less to allergies, but I need to look into it more. I need to look into it more. Okay, so we're in the vascular plants, we're in the seed plants. Sporophyte generation is dominant, long-lived. Obviously, the plant has vasculature, right? The sporophyte has vasculature, and true roots, true stems, true leaves. Here you go. This is a picture of sporophyte. Ginkgo is a tree. Ginkgo is a tree, right? We have come across trees so far. There were some tree ferns, Cycads are obviously trees as well. But ginkgo, if you see this picture, even if you've never taken a plant class before and I showed you this picture, you would say, yes, that's a tree, right? That's a tree. And it's a big tree. They can get super, super big. About 100 feet tall, give or take, when they're fully grown. And about 3 to 4 feet wide. 3 to 4 feet wide. And so the trunk can get like 3 to 4 feet wide. So I'm saying wide, it gets wide, right? So what does this tell us? Does this tell us about growth in Ginkgo biloba? Gets super, super tall, but also gets super, super wide, right? And so Catherine wrote in the chat box, secondary growth, correct, right? Correct, because if that trunk is getting 3 to 4 feet wide, 3 to 4 feet, I can't even, I mean, maybe this is probably, okay, fine, this is probably like 4 feet, but that's like super wide. And in order for that to occur, you have to have those secondary growth, lateral meristems, and then the tissues. Oh, see, right. Abundant secondary growth. Not only does it have secondary growth, it has a lot of it. So last time we talked about cycads, and cycads had, did cycads have a lot of secondary growth? Were they like super wide, like, you know, really, you know, 3 to 4 feet wide, and you're gonna go build a house out of it? No, cycads had limited secondary growth, but ginkgo has abundant secondary growth. Here's so you remember what I'm talking about, right? Primary growth is to increase in length at the root and the shoot. Now notice, I will stay here because sometimes this can get confusing. I'll use, I don't know, orange. Length, right? So like, yeah, it's gonna, for primary growth, it's gonna increase at the shoot and at the root to get longer. But notice also, like, this branch is getting longer, this branch is getting longer, this branch is getting longer, etc. So there's lengthening occurring here too, right? Like there are meristems at the tips of these branches that are also increasing in length. Oh, whoa. But secondary growth, when we talk about width, we're talking about things like this, right? So the trunk getting wider is an example of secondary growth. If a branch gets wider, right? Wider and thicker, that's also secondary growth. But I just want you to keep in mind that, like, you know, these things here, they're growing longer, right? Branches are growing longer, so that's still primary growth. Okay. Ginkgo is deciduous. Deciduous means that it loses its leaves in the winter. So right now, you guys are doing your phenology assignment, taking pictures of different trees and woody shrubs, right? And most of the things that you're taking pictures of probably don't have any leaves on them right now, but hopefully they will soon as spring continues on. So ginkgo is one of those. So who knows, maybe one of you out there is taking pictures of ginkgo right now for your phenology assignment and you don't even know it. And then when leaves show up and they're little fan-shaped leaves, you're going to be like, oh, I know this ginkgo. Yeah, deciduous. This is a good time also to point out. So I know you guys love Google. Like, I know you love, like, you know, if somebody asks you a question or you're trying to do an assignment or something and you're like, oh, I'll just Google, let me Google, you know, I know you guys, I know what you guys all do. But this is a great example. So before pre-COVID, in the before times, I had, you know, there were homework assignments and one student, so I had asked a question about deciduous, and one student wrote that deciduous is when a mammal loses its baby teeth. And okay, yes, like deciduous refers to like something falling out, and I guess like when animals lose their baby teeth and the baby teeth fall out, like I guess that's a term for it. But this just shows you like why Google's not necessarily your friend, right? Because like some of these words can mean different things. And so if I ask you what deciduous, we're in plant kingdom, right? So if I ask you what deciduous is, and you tell me it means when mammals lose their baby teeth, you got to check yourself. You're doing something wrong. So Google responsibly, and also keep in mind that everything I ask you guys, like on assignments or in exams, is something I covered in class and something from these slides. So yeah, just, just a disclaimer there. Like, don't tell me about, don't tell me about teeth. Anyways, every time I see the word deciduous, I think of that story. Yeah. And I remember grading that student's assignment, like I was circling it and I was like, we're in a plant class, like stop Googling. Okay. Right, I know. Oh boy, Okay, so Ginkgo, not Google. Ginkgo is deciduous, which in this class does not mean teeth falling out. It means leaves falling off at the end of a season. That's what deciduous means for our purposes. Another reason, Ginkgo does really, really awesomely in cities, but also Ginkgo is just kind of an awesome tree. And one reason it's awesome, aside from the stinky seeds, right? But one reason it's awesome is because in the fall, the leaves turn this just gorgeous, bright yellow color. So when you have a lot of them planted, it's a really nice showcase of fall foliage when that season comes around. Look at that. Oh, beautiful. Little yellow golden fans, right? Just beautiful. Okay. Habit. So remember, habit means form, whereas habitat means like where it grows, right? But we're talking about habit here, or form. So Ginkgo has a habit that we can describe as decurrent, or if you want to be fancy, deliquescent. So either one is fine, decurrent or deliquescent. So what I'll say is, you're like, what does that mean? Those are crazy words. Think about when you were a kid, or maybe even now. Think about if you wanted to draw a tree, right? Draw a tree. And a lot of times when you draw a tree, it would be like a stick and then like a circle on top, right? And then inside the circle are like the branches, right? That's like your basic, I'm a kid drawing a tree shape, right? Tree form. And that tree shape is what we call decurrent or deliquescent. I like the word deliquescent because I love the Latin and Greek roots, and deliquescent, it comes from the Latin word deliquescere, which means to dissolve. So it's almost like the branches kind of like dissolve away from the trunk. Dr. Casper used to always say, I have to give him props a lot of times because he taught me so much, and he is a great person to talk plants with. He used to say, when I put ice in my gin at night, the ice deliquesces away, like it dissolves away. So Brittany's asking, all trees don't do that? Right, no, not all trees have this form. Let's see, do I show on the next slide? Yeah, here you go. Good job, Brittany. We're moving us right into the next slide, right? So Ginkgo has this decurrent or deliquescent habit or form, but no, not all trees have this. Here's some examples of the others, right? So palm trees, for example, have this columnar look or habit. You might remember in the cycads also have either a columnar, cycads also had a bulbous, which is not shown on the slide, but I'll draw it. So like cycads also had a bulbous habit where the trunk's like a little kind of circly thing, on the ground, and then the leaves kind of like come out from, whoa, usually if it's bulbous, it's kind of short, so I should make it short. The leaves kind of like come out from the little round thing, so that's bulbous habit. But even just thinking of like your palm tree, right? Like a palm tree is columnar meaning it has this super long trunk, and then the leaves all come from the same spot. I can't even draw. At the tip of the trunk. Whereas decurrent or deliquescent, the branches all kind of come out of different parts. It's hard to see on this drawing, but like this branch, yeah, it's coming out of the top. But it's, I guess here's a better way to say the difference. Palm trees don't have branches. Palm trees don't have branches. They have a trunk and then leaves coming out of the top of the trunk. If something's decurrent or deliquescent, it has a trunk and then branches that come out of the top into a kind of like a circle. They dissolve away, right? Dissolve away. Another tree shape. So I guess if you were a little kid and you were drawing like a winter scene, you might have drawn this kind of shape of a tree, right? Like a trunk with like a kind of triangular shape at the top, like a Christmas tree, right? And so that is called excurrent. Excurrent is, if you like the remembering decurrent, it might be easier to remember excurrent, because one is like a stick with a circle on top, and one is a stick with a triangle on top. And then you only have to worry about columnar, and in the cases of the cycads, bulbous. Yeah, so yeah, different forms or habits. Alrighty, yeah, so here's ginkgo leaf. We're still talking about the sporophyte plant. Let me move this so I can see what this slide says. Still talking about sporophyte plant. Ginkgo leaves they have lots and lots of veins. Lots and lots of veins, not just one vein, lots of veins. So what does that tell us? I already mentioned it at the top of the class, but if a leaf has many veins, all right, Diksha says megaphyll. And am I pronouncing your name correctly? Is it Diksha or is it Diksha? Well, you'll have to tell. Yes, the first way is right. Okay, great. Yay. Yeah, please do, just a reminder, everyone, if I say your name incorrectly, please correct me. Cool. So yeah, megaphylls, absolutely right, Diksha. So megaphylls have lots of veins. And here, so it's saying mature leaves are bilobed and fanned. What does that mean? Bilobed and fanned. Bilobed means that so here's one leaf. This whole thing is one leaf, right? What do we call this part of the leaf? Petiole, yes. What do we call this part of the leaf? Frond is, well, so frond is another word for the whole leaf. Frond is another word for the whole leaf. So what do we call just the flat or just the green part above the petiole? Blade, yay, yeah, blade or lamina, either one is fine. Great. So you see how I'm like building, oh, and it says petiole on the slide too. Oh, it says lamina blade on the slide too. Okay, sorry, didn't even look at that, but yeah, didn't even see that. Okay. Yeah, so the leaf is bilobed, which means, so look, the blade or the lamina has like these two lobes. So that's what bilobed means. Fan shaped because it kind of looks like a fan. Has lots and lots of veins, and the veins have that same pattern of well, back before we said grow, split. Remember that dichotomous that we came across back in non-vascular plants? The veins have that pattern, so you can't see it super great on this, but it's like, here's a vein, and then at some point it'll kind of like split, and then later on kind of like split again, and then up here, like split again. So it has this pattern of dichotomous venation and super long petiole, super long petiole. Cool. So that's what the leaf looks like. Sometimes though, I will say, sometimes when the leaf is growing and not fully done yet, it may look more than bilobed. It may look like it has all these lobes in it, such as this picture on the left. But when they finally get mature, they'll be bilobed, usually. And here is our pinule from maidenhair fern again, right? So you can see, and do a side-by-side comparison, that the maidenhair fern, it should say leaflet or pinule shape, but whatever. So the maidenhair fern leaflet has that same dichotomous venation. I don't know if you can see it very well, but like, let's see where you see, like, okay, look down here. See like how it goes like grow and then it splits, and then up here again split. So that same dichotomous venation that the maidenhair tree or ginkgo has. And so you can see why people thought that these look similar. And also check out how the immature ginkgo leaves look like the leaflet of maidenhair fern, right? Very similar. Okay. All right. So we have to talk a little bit about branches and stems because ginkgo has abundant secondary growth. We're in a tree now. And so we have to talk about branches and stems. So at the beginning of the class, remember I was telling you that primary growth is lengthening, right? And secondary growth is widening, getting wider. And I showed you that, yes, okay, primary growth does occur at like the top and the bottom of, so at the top of the shoot system and the bottom of the root system, right? Because the shoot system and the root system need to lengthen. And that the secondary meristems are kind of like throughout the stem laterally. And I mentioned at the top of the class that the branches of a tree also are also having primary growth, in that the branches of the tree are getting longer, and as they age will also get wider. So that's primary and secondary growth. So in order to do this, branches have areas on them called buds, and there are different types of buds. There are apical buds, which you may guess, here, let's change colors to blue. There are apical buds, which you might guess occur at the apex or the tip. And there are lateral buds. Actually, let's go forward. I think I might, usually I color code. Oh, here, this is good. Yeah. There are apical buds and there are lateral buds. Both of those are going to be places of growth. So here you go. This is a branch. And at the tip of the branch, you have apical bud. And on the sides of the branch, you have what are called lateral or axillary buds. Axillary buds. Now let me just go forward. I want to see. Okay, yeah. Axillary buds. The reason why they're called axillary buds is, so obviously this branch that we're looking at here doesn't have any leaves on it right anymore. This is like a branch or a twig you would go find outside right now, because there's no leaves on things right now. But this branch would have had leaves on it at some point. And those leaves would have occurred here. So like here's a leaf, here's a leaf, right? They would have occurred there along the branch, right? Here's where another leaf would have been, right? Here's where another leaf would have been, right? Okay. Axillary, so leaves, so let's draw this leaf again over here. There's a leaf. Leaves have what are called an axil. An axil. And the axil of a leaf is located, I'll change colors, is located right here. This is where the axil actually located right here. That's where the axil of the leaf is. And that's also where this bud will be as well. So that's why we call it an axillary bud, because it's a bud that occurs in the axil, axil of the leaf, axil of the leaf. Oh, and then this is something I realized last time after we broke for the day. I realized that I kind of led you astray. I'll write it in the chat box. So we've seen these terms before: abaxial and adaxial, right? And I always say ab meaning bottom, right? Ab, bottom. And that's how you remember what side of the leaf that you are dealing with. Well, I led you astray, people going into medical field. I led you astray in that, yes, okay, in the case of a leaf, if you're talking about the abaxial side of the leaf, you are talking about the bottom. But the prefixes are, I said it the wrong way last time. So ab means away from. And I started to say this and then I kind of got twisted when I was last class. Towards. Ab means away from. Ad means towards. So for example, some of you might do like different types of exercise or like stretching, or again, if you're in the medical field, maybe you've seen abduction and adduction, abduction and adduction. That usually refers to, like, if I was going to move my arm, I would abduct my arm, it would go like away from my body. And if I was going to adduct my arm, it would go towards my body. Anyways, the reason I'm bringing this up is because of abaxial and adaxial. So in terms of leaves, remember I said there's an axil right here, right? And so the top of the leaf is the surface of the leaf that faces the axil. So we say it's the adaxial surface of the leaf, whereas the bottom of the leaf is moving away from the axial. Here, this drawing's not good. I have to draw the leaf differently. 1 second. Look, I'll draw a flat leaf. Here's a leaf, and it's flat, right? It's flat, like it's like this, right? Here's the axial. The top of the leaf kind of faces the axial. So we say this is the surface of the leaf that faces towards the axial, whereas the bottom of the leaf faces away from the axial. And that's why we call it abaxial, is the bottom. But for me and for you guys, the easiest way to remember what side of the leaf you're talking about is the fact that ab is the bottom of the leaf. Okay, I digress. Oh gosh, branch. Parts of a branch. All right, so we have the apical bud at the tip. We have the lateral buds that are located at those axils. And then there's these other terms that are regions. You have node and internode, node and internode. Here's a node, here's a node, here's another node. Those are regions, like an area on the branch is a node. And in between those areas are what's called internodes. So there's an internode, here's an internode. Inter means between. So these terms refer to areas on a branch. These terms refer to actual structures. So what do I mean by that? Sometimes people get confused because they might say like, well, what's the difference between a node and a lateral bud? Well, the lateral bud is a structure that happens to occur in this area of the branch called a node. So that's the difference. Yep. All right. These are just parts of a branch. All right, so I color coded a lot of this stuff for you guys to be able to look over when you're doing the slides by yourself. So you got apical buds, lateral buds. The apical buds produce what are known as long shoots. And this is something we'll see in the conifer lab as well, or conifer lecture as well. And the lateral buds produce short shoots. So in ginkgo, here's what those look like. So here's an apical bud. And this blue thing is the long shoot. The apical bud is responsible for growing that long shoot to really lengthen the branch. The lateral buds are located here at the nodes. Located at the nodes are the lateral buds, and the lateral buds produce short shoots, which are shown here in red. And you will notice, if I get rid of these, the leaves emerge from those buds, mostly from the lateral buds, right? So here's apical bud, which is going to grow the branch longer. Here are those lateral buds, and look at all the leaves coming out of those short shoots. Okay. This is just another way to look at it, the exact same thing we just saw on the previous slide, but this way maybe makes more sense to you. So you have long shoot. Do I color code it? No, but like long shoot, I'll use the same colors. Here's the long shoot. Right, here's the short shoot. Here's another short shoot. Cannot see the apical bud on this branch. It's at the top, it's cut off, but the lateral buds would have occurred here at the nodes. And notice that the leaves are emerging from those short shoots. Okay. Oh, and so we learned the terms nodes and intranodes, right? Nodes and intranodes. So long shoots have nodes and intranodes. Short shoots do not. Short shoots do not. So here's a long shoot. Oh, blue's a bad choice on this slide. But here's a long shoot. And the long shoot has node, 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 and then internodes in between, right? Short shoots don't have that. Short shoots don't have that. They basically just only have, it's basically like just nodes, but you don't need to know that. Just know that they don't have nodes and internodes. And if any of you are taking photographs of a ginkgo tree for your phylogeny assignment, phenology assignment, this is what the leaves might look like when they first start to emerge. Ginkgo is kind of cool because you can tell ginkgo even when it doesn't have leaves on it, in part because of these short shoots. So when all the leaves fall off, the branches still have these little short shoots. And from far away, it almost looks like a Lego tree or something. It's like very peg-like. Makes it easy to identify when there's no leaves. So the short shoots emerge from the long shoots. Short shoots emerge from the long shoots, sorry. Short shoots emerge from the long shoots, and the leaves emerge from the short shoots, right? Which I've already said. Okay. Oh, so there you go. Yeah. See, this is ginkgo in the wintertime when the leaves are off. Super easy to identify because the short shoots are very visible, and the whole branch almost looks kind of like peg-like. So somebody like me, I can spot a ginkgo like blocks away during the winter because of this look to the branches. All right. Oh boy, growth. Yeah, we got time. We've talked about this before. Some of this we've talked about, actually everything on this slide we have talked about before. I'm going to close the chat box for a second so I could see better. right? Recall, every time it says recall means we've already talked about this before, but let's talk about it again a little bit. So you have primary growth, you have secondary growth. Primary growth occurs via the apical meristem. And we've already talked about this. That apical meristem gives rise to primary meristems, protoderm, ground meristem, and procambium. And those primary meristems give rise to those primary tissues, epidermis, ground tissue, and vascular tissue, right? Xylem and phloem. Primary xylem and phloem. Primary xylem and phloem. Okay. So in stems where primary growth is occurring in ginkgo, the vasculature is arranged in a U-stele. The vasculature is arranged in a U-stele, and vascular bundles are in a ring. Are they? I guess we're gonna look. Yeah. Okay. So it's a U-stele, but the rods are, I guess, arranged in a ring in stems where primary growth is occurring. And I have to look back. We don't, for what it's worth, we don't really focus that much on primary growth in ginkgo stem. We're going to focus mostly on secondary growth, but I have to look back to see. I think the vascular bundles are arranged in a ring, and I don't think that there's like, maybe there is something in the middle. In that case, it would kind of be a U-stele like siphonostele. But anyways, I care more about secondary growth in ginkgo. I'm just showing you that, you know, you still have primary growth too. But this is what I care about more in ginkgo, because ginkgo has abundant secondary growth, so we talk about it a lot more. So we just had a refresher on the primary growth. Secondary growth is, so primary growth is by the apical meristem, secondary growth is by lateral meristems. And the lateral meristems, there are two of them. They both end in the word cambium. That's nice. And there's the vascular cambium and there's the cork cambium. And vascular cambium gives rise to your secondary xylem, secondary phloem. Cork cambium gives rise to cork, also known as phellem and phelloderm. And remember, secondary growth is about widening the stems, right? Widening stems like the trunk, widening stems like branches to get wider. Also widening roots, but we haven't really talked about that yet. Look, wow, ginkgo, dang, you got some secondary growth, because look, it could get 3 to 4 feet in diameter trunk. Okay, that is wide, super wide. And remember I said that, like, if you want to get 100 feet tall, you have to get wide. You can't just get 100 feet tall and be like a little stick. You have to get wider, or else you're just going to get blown down. So ginkgo has abundant secondary growth. The older stems show abundant secondary growth. And in particular, what is abundant is secondary xylem, aka wood. So let me just let you know that whenever you've talked about wood, like, oh, I would like some wood floors, or oh, let me like get a wooden door for this room, or let's get some a wooden table and wooden chairs, right? Anytime you're talking about wood, you are talking about secondary xylem. Secondary xylem is wood. So if you have hardwood floors in your place, you have hard secondary xylem floors, okay? If you have a wooden table and chairs, you have secondary xylem table and chairs, because that what we call wood is actually secondary xylem. So in ginkgo, which has a lot of secondary growth and a lot of secondary xylem, aka wood, that secondary xylem is arranged in rings. And actually, whenever we talk about secondary xylem in plants going forward, Secondary xylem is always going to be arranged in rings. One ring of secondary xylem is going to grow per year. Secondary xylem is a tissue, and it's composed of things called tracheid cells in ginkgo. And there's also these things called wood rays, which consist of ray/parenchyma cells. Don't worry about the cell types right now. Don't worry about the cell types right now. What I want you to worry about right now is secondary growth is for widening. Secondary growth is abundant in ginkgo. What's abundant? The secondary xylem. How does it grow? It grows in rings, and that makes sense because if you want to get wider as a trunk or a branch, you have to get wider this way, and so that's going to involve adding tissue year after year, year after year, and that tissue that's added is secondary xylem. Maybe you remember, maybe you've heard of before that you can tell how old a tree is if you count the rings, right? You count the rings. Well, the rings that you would be counting would be those secondary xylem rings. One ring per year. Okay. This is a cross section through ginkgo, an old stem showing you how the secondary growth tissues, so showing you where the secondary growth tissues are located. And on this slide, we still see a little leftover primary xylem and primary phloem, because remember I told you before, all plants have primary growth, only some plants have secondary growth. And as we saw in the recall slides earlier in the lecture, the secondary growth tissues are going to arise from those primary growth tissues. And so in plants where you have a transition from primary growth to secondary growth, sometimes you can see with your eyes some of the primary tissues, but ultimately those will go away and the entire thing will be just secondary growth. But here I have the secondary growth tissues shown in blue. If you're going from the outside of the stem towards the inside, you have cork, followed by the cork cambium, followed by phloderm. Just talking about the secondary ones right now. Followed by secondary phloem, vascular cambium, secondary xylem. This wood ray thing is just showing you this. Don't worry about that right now. But yeah, going from the outside of the stem inside, cork cambium, phloderm, secondary phloem, vascular cambium, secondary xylem. And then this would be the inside of the stem. Here. Right, lateral meristem, cork cambium, vascular cambium, right? And I think if I remember these slides correctly, I think I make attempts to like color code this. I think it gets a little messy. So I apologize. Yeah, I was right. Oh God. Oh, this is just, man, when I first made this slide years ago, you don't know how long this was when I was still learning PowerPoint, and you don't know how long it took me to make this horrible color coded slide. Oh, it's nice to look at though. Kind of, reminds me of where I was and where I've come. Okay, so yeah, there's two lateral meristems, right? There's the cork cambium and there's the vascular cambium. Here we go. The vascular cambium will initially arise between the primary xylem and primary phloem. And the vascular cambium is going to, remember, these blue things here are meristems, right? Meristems. So they're going to grow things, grow different tissues. The tissues that the vascular cambium is going to grow are secondary phloem and secondary xylem. The vascular cambium is going to grow secondary phloem towards the outside of the stem. So remember, the top here is here I'll use, I guess, red. Here's the vascular cambium right here with this blue line. There's a big rectangle identifying the vascular cambium. Secondary phloem is going to grow this way from the vascular cambium. Secondary xylem is going to grow this way from the vascular cambium. Cork cambium, remember the reason it's telling you where they arise is because these secondary meristems, these lateral meristems arose from primary tissues, right? But so the cork cambium came from the cortex, and the cork cambium is going to grow toward the outside of it. Cork, aka phellem, and toward the inside, it's going to grow phelloderm. And we learned a collective term. So if you are talking about all three of these things, you can call it the periderm. All three. We are in ginkgo. Ginkgo has abundant secondary growth, right? Ginkgo has abundant secondary xylem in particular. So the secondary xylem, one ring is going to be produced each year, and each ring has two parts to it. There's early or spring wood and late or summer wood. Yeah, so here, this is just a close-up of this, by the way. So here, secondary xylem tissue, right? That's all this. And so we're going to zoom in on that. That's what this next slide is showing you. Don't get dizzy. Here we go. We're zooming in there. One ring of secondary xylem per year. And there's early or spring wood and late or summer wood. And all that means is this. So each year, think about it. Each year consists of winter, spring, summer, and fall, right? That's 1 year. Or you can go spring, summer, fall, winter, whatever. But 1 year has all 4 seasons, correct? When the plant first wakes up in spring and starts to grow, there's a lot of water available. You know, April showers brings May flowers, right? Like there's a lot of rain. Spring tends to be a pretty wet season. Snow is melting, things like that. So lots of water, mild temperatures, and all the trees for the most part have no leaves on them. So everybody's getting lots of sun because there's no shade. There's no shade. And what happens in that time during spring is you get a lot of fast growth occurring. And so therefore the cell sizes of the secondary xylem are quite large. They're quite large because they grew super fast. They had a lot of resources. And that's what we call the spring or early wood. And then later, the summertime comes, it's hotter. Sometimes you have shade from other trees. There's less water. And so that late or summer wood of the secondary xylem kind of has a smaller cell size, right? Smaller cell size. And so each of those will occur every year. So if we're going to do one annual ring in this, okay. I need to get a mouse. I realize part of this is because I'm drawing with a mouse pad and not like an actual mouse. All right, so one annual ring rather, right? Here's one annual ring, right? Like here's the ring part. It would have kept going down all the way around the tree trunk. Can't draw, save my life here. But yeah, early wood is here, late wood is here. Look, one annual ring. You can also see these other cells called wood rays. We'll talk a lot more about wood rays when we get to the conifer lab. But they basically they're types. They help with exchange, like moving things toward the center of the stem, toward the outside of the stem. Like obviously, if you're having growth, you need things like sugar to fuel that growth. And so these wood rays radiate out of the, or throughout the stem, but we'll learn more about those in the conifer lab. So older stems are basically all secondary xylem, or AKA wood. So like I said before, if you have, you know, if you work with wood, like I'm going to make a wooden table or wooden floors, you're using pieces of trees that basically only consist of secondary xylem because they're from older mature stems. So it's a cross section through a tree trunk. And on this tree trunk, pretty much everything you look at here is secondary xylem. Note the annual ring. So I'll use blue again. Look, you see all these rings? Like here's one, there's another one, right? They're like, here's another one. There's many, many, many here, right? So you can see the annual rings, and then the wood rays, which radiate out, are those things that look like spokes on a bicycle. We call them wood rays because they radiate. I don't know if you remember from math, you have like the radius of a circle. So the wood rays, they radiate out. And like I said, they help with transporting food and such to from the inside to the outside of the stem. All right. Yeah, let me see what we're doing here. 42. Don't think, well, we'll see. Yeah, you know, these slides are not super dense. I think we'll give it a shot. We'll try. Because a lot of these terms now are going to be repeats of what we've learned before. So ginkgo is dioecious. I already said this at the top of the class. There's female plants and there's male plants. Female plants bear ovules. Male plants have strobilus, male strobilus. Very much like we saw in the cycads. Here is a drawing of a female plant. Female plants bear the ovules in ginkgo. So think back to the cycads, which is the only other seed plant we've learned about so far. Where did cycads have their ovules? Where did cycads have their ovules? Even just like simply, like in a simple description. Where were cycad ovules? Were cycad ovules on strobilus? Everyone's like, Rebecca, oh, everyone's like, Rebecca, we have our lab exam tomorrow. We don't want to think about ginkgo, but lab exams covering stuff that you've already covered a bunch of times. So think back to the cycad lab that we had last time on Tuesday. There were two types of trees, right? There were two types of trees. There were male trees and female trees. Male trees had male strobilus. Female trees had, so Brittany's saying sometimes, yes. So sometimes the ovules are on a strobilus in cycads. Other times in cycads, they were in what's called a fertile crown, right? Right. But in the ginkgo, no more strobilus for the females. So the female plants in ginkgo have ovules that are paired on a stalk. So if I ask you, where is ginkgo's ovules? You would say paired on a stalk, right? So here's a stalk, and see this pair of things, those are the ovules. Look, here's another one. Paired it on a stalk. And to be fair, it is a stalk, but it actually is really a very much reduced megasporophyll. So it's kind of almost like here's a petiole, here's a petiole, here's a petiole, and there's no blade or lamina anymore, just this pair of ovules. So really reduced megasporophyll. But where are the ovules in ginkgo? They are paired on a stalk. The stalks come out next to the leaves. So they're next to the short, they grow out of the short shoots. And so in a way, this is an example of dimorphism because we have these reduced megasporophylls that have ovules on them, and then your normal photosynthetic leaves. So you can think of the fertile and non-fertile leaves, right? Okay. Cool. Yeah, this is what I just said before, that the ovules are paired on a stalk, but that the stalk is indeed a very reduced megasporophyll, such that it's just a petiole, and there's no longer any lamina. We learned last time about in the cycad reproduction about this sticky drop, right? This pollination drop. Well, ginkgo ovules also produce this sticky drop. Here you can see it in these pictures. Here's one sticky drop coming out of that ovule. Here's another sticky drop coming out of that ovule. Sticky drop, aka pollination drop. So that's going to be where pollen grains will land. When that occurs, when pollen grains land on that sticky drop, pollination occurs, process pollination. All right, we looked at this last time. This is the exact same slide we saw in the cycad lab, or the cycad lecture, right? So these are the parts of the ovule. You have the integument shown here in kind of this gold color. And then inside of that, a megasporangium, aka nucellus, which has inside of it a female gametophyte with archegonia. So that's the same things we learned in before in cycads. Ginkgo ovules have those same things. In terms of the male plants, just like in cycads, the male plants have their microsporangia arranged in a strobili. So I told you last time, in terms of ordering things to remember them better, cycads ovules are either in a strobilus or in a crown of fertile leaves. Ginkgo ovules always paired on a stalk. Cycad microsporangia always arranged in a strobilus. Ginkgo microsporangia always arranged in a strobilus. And when we get to conifers, their microsporangia are also always arranged in a strobilus. So this is kind of a good way to stay organized. On the male trees, the strobili emerge from the short shoots, just like we saw with the ovules on the female trees. So they're coming out next to those fertile leaves. You could see some strobili here. This is one. This is one. We already know what a strobilus is made up of: a stem, some leaves, and then microsporangia, right? Well, the ginkgo strobilus has the same things. The leaves are very reduced, almost look stalk-like, and each leaf or microsporophyll has on it 2 pollen sacs, or 2 microsporangia. Remember, the microsporangia are going to ultimately release pollen grains. So we can call, in the seed plants, we can call the microsporangia pollen sacs. So this on the right is a strobilus. This whole thing, this is one strobilus, right? Here's the stem. There's all of these kind of stalk-like leaves or stalk-like microsporophylls coming off of this stem. If we were to pull one of those off, like we did here, we can see the 2 pollen sacs or 2 microsporangia on each one, right? So like here's one, this is 1, this is 2, right? 1, 2. This is a close-up. This is a close-up of the strobilus, male strobilus. Stem, stalk-like leaf. On each stalk-like leaf, 2 microsporangia or 2 pollen sacs. Here's 1, here's 2. Here's another stalk-like leaf. Here's one of its 2, or here's its 2 microsporangia, aka, oops, aka pollen sacs. All right. Agent of pollination. No, it's not a new James Bond movie. Agent of pollination. Agent of pollination is how we describe the way that pollen gets to the ovule. So in ginkgo, The agent of pollination is wind. So wind is going to bring the pollen grains to the ovules. And to compare it with the cycads, it was also wind, but also sometimes insects. In ginkgo, it's usually just the wind. So these pictures are showing you the male strobilus that have already opened and released their pollen grains into the wind. I think we're almost, yeah, we are. Great. Yeah, cool. All right. This is a slight difference, but basically the pollen grain of ginkgo is pretty much the same as the pollen grain that we saw in the cycads, except that now there's 2 prothallus cells for whatever reason. We still, even though there's 2 now, we still don't know what they do. But it is, think about it this way. We think that ginkgo is the oldest living seed plant, right? And it has 2 prothallus cells compared to cycads, which are a little bit more later evolved, right? So what you might think of is like ginkgo is older and it had 2 prothallus cells. We don't really know what the prothallus cells do. By the time you get to cycads, the pollen grain has evolved to have lost one of those prothallus cells, because maybe it's just not, that's why we think it might be leftover, vestigial. But it has the other things: pollen tube cell, which grows pollen tubes, and then a generative cell, which is going to generate sperm, 2 swimming sperm. And compared to cycads, fertilization is going to occur much faster after pollination in ginkgo. So remember, cycads are facing extinction in many cases. Part of that is because from between when pollen lands on the ovule and sperm is able to fertilize the egg, that can take months. But in ginkgo, it doesn't take that long. So much faster. So they're not facing extinction. So alternation of generations in ginkgo is basically the same that we saw in cycad. So you can refer to the cycad lecture to see the different steps. But some differences include that, you know, the structures that bear ovules, right? So in cycads, it's a strobilus or crown of fertile leaves. In ginkgo, they're paired on a stalk. Number of cells of pollen grains is different. The agent of pollination slightly different, and then how long it takes to go from pollination to fertilization. These are those stinky seeds the female trees bear after fertilization occurs. Yeah, so the seeds mature and eventually fall off from the tree. So note, we are in the gymnosperms. We're in the gymnosperms. Gymnosperm, right? And gymno means naked. Naked what? Naked ovule, and then later naked seed. So I'm mentioning that because if you didn't know better, you would think that this is a fruit. This is not a fruit. This is a seed. This is a seed because we're in the gymnosperm. So this is not a fruit. This is not a fruit. This is a seed, a naked seed. You can see the seed with your naked eyes. It's not inside of a fruit. But for what it's worth, in ginkgo, the seed coat kind of makes it look a little like a fruit, because so after fertilization occurs, the layers of the integument that surround the megasporangium are going to become the seed coat. They're going to become the seed coat. And in ginkgo, this seed coat is kind of fleshy. So if you were to cut open a ginkgo seed, it kind of looks like a fruit. It kind of looks like a fruit, but it's actually just a seed with a very fleshy seed coat. Has 3 different layers. Okay, wow, we did it. Okay, so that's all for ginkgo. Oh, and we did it. I'm happy. Next class, we'll start talking about the conifers. And yep, next class, we'll talk about the conifers. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer that here. You guys have your lab exam tomorrow. Good luck on that. Should be, I think at this point, pretty straightforward. You guys have an assignment due on Tuesday before class. That's on cycads and the introduction to the seed plants. And semester is wrapping up, right? We're moving through it quickly. Let's see what's on the agenda. So today is the 25th, right? Okay, good. So I'm glad we finished this today because we need to make up a little bit of time. Next class, we'll start the conifers. Maybe we'll see if we can get through that class at this. We'll see if we can shorten that section maybe a little bit. Then we have a virtual campus tree field trip, which I will lead you on. And then we will go to the angiosperms, and lecture exam 2 is in a few weeks. So we're in good shape. I'd say for now, just focus on that lab exam. And then after the lab exam is over, look over the last 2 lectures, and have a good day, everyone. Have a great weekend, everyone. And I have meetings with some of you today. I'll see you later in those meetings for office hours.
Hey, Professor.
Yes.
Dumb question. So if this tree is so, I mean, it's nice. It's a good tree, but you know how it's like stinky? I used to think all the time that it was a mistake that we planted all over the cities and stuff when there's so many other trees. Do you know why it was like that one was like the choice of tree to put in the cities?
Yeah, so part of the reason why, Vivian's asking about why is ginkgo used so much in cities? So part of the reason is because they do so very well. Cities, so I study plants in cities, and I can tell you that cities are very stressful environments for plants to grow in. They often the plants don't have a lot of soil to grow in. Like, think of a street tree pit, not a lot of soil. So the soil tends to be very compacted, very dry, or flooded, full of different pollutants like de-icing salts or sometimes heavy metals from when we used lead in our gasoline. And then it's hotter in cities than it is outside of cities. There's more certain pests in cities compared to not in cities. So cities are super stressful environments for plants to live in. Street trees in particular take a beating because they're next to traffic. They get hit by trucks. They have to deal with really poor air quality. And so the reason why ginkgo is such a popular street tree is because of how very well it deals with all of that stuff. So if you plant a ginkgo tree in a city, you really don't have to do anything after that, and it'll do just fine. Whereas a lot of other species of trees that you might want to plant would die after a while because they just can't take the stress.
Oh, wow, that makes sense. Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, no worries. Now, the only thing is we got to plant the male plants, not the female plants, because of the stink.
For real. Like, because I used to live in an apartment that had one of those trees right in front. So imagine the sidewalk and the front where the cars were parked would be full of seeds. So every time you walk through there, if you want to go to school or just get out of the house, you got to step on the seeds, and all your shoes stink. And everywhere you walk, everything, it was horrible.
No, it really smells bad. It's like, if you try to explain to somebody like how it smells and they've never smelled it, they just don't get it. But if you've smelled it,
Yeah, that's why I got scared when I saw them planting that one in Bradley Hall. I'm like, oh my God, no. But now I know that there's male trees.
It's probably a male. It's probably a male.
Yeah. But thank you, Professor.
Yeah, thank you. And if Ben sends me the link about allergies. I'll learn more about that and we'll follow up with that next time. All right, guys. Have a great one.